One of the most exciting, as well as dangerous opening strategies are gambits. The gambit player often sacrifices one or two pawns, or even at times an entire piece, to rip open lines and try to gain a huge lead in development to overwhelm the opponent with an irresistible attack. A gambit is like a gamble. If it works, the gambit player often wins quickly. But if the gambit fails and the defense holds, the gambit player can simply have a bad position and even enter a losing endgame where the missing material decides the game. Let's take a look at some examples of gambit play. After e4, e5, and f4, this opening is known as the king's gambit. White gambits the f-pawn, allowing e takes f4, in order to gain more central control with d4. White also hopes to take advantage of not having a white pawn on the f-file to use that file to attack with rooks and a queen later in the game. The king's gambit is risky, not only because it sacrifices a pawn, but it also opens up white's king to possible attack on the e1 to h4 diagonal. After accepting the gambit pawn, black is already threatening queen h4 check, so white typically plays knight to f3, developing a piece and protecting the h4 square from attack. White's goal is to develop quickly and set up an attack before black can complete development. If white succeeds, white will often win with quick attacks. If white is unable to break through black's position, black will often be up material, have a safer king, and enjoy a better position. Another gambit for white that sacrifices even more material is known as the Danish gambit. It begins after d4. After e takes d4, white offers another pawn with c3. After d takes c3, white develops with bishop c4, offering another pawn. After c takes b2 and bishop b2, white has sacrificed two pawns to open the long dark squared diagonal a1 to h8. And white now has two bishops already developed and pointing toward black's kingside. White's pawn on e4 also controls good central space, so black must be careful as black does not have any pieces developed. As black is so far behind in development, one popular plan is to return at least one of the gambit pawns with d5. This opens up black's light-squared bishop, and it also attracts white's bishop to d5, where it will later be attacked by knight f6. This will help black catch up in development. It's important to remember that when you play against a gambit and accept material, one effective strategy is to return some of the material to catch up in development and slow down your opponent's attack. Since e takes d5 would block the light-squared bishop's attack on black's weak f7 square, and queen takes d5 would offer a trade of queens, usually not a good way to continue in attack, white usually plays bishop takes d5. And after knight f6, black's first piece is developed. Notice that black's king is overworked. It is protecting both the f7 square and the queen on d8. White has the nice deflection tactic, bishop takes f7 check. This is why gambit play can be so dangerous. When your opponent gains a lead in development, these tactics often appear. It turns out, however, that black has not blundered, because black has a clever trick prepared after king takes f7 and queen takes d8. Black loses a queen for the moment, but notice that the white queen is lined up with black's bishop and rook. Can you find a discovered attack that regains the queen for black? That's right. After bishop b4 check, black's bishop checks the king and reveals the rook's attack on white's queen. White's best move is to play queen to d2, gaining more material before the doomed queen leaves the board. After bishop takes d2 check, knight takes d2, and rook e8, the wild gambit play has settled down where both sides have equal material in this queenless middle game. Not all opening gambits are played by white. After the moves d4, knight f6, and c4, black can play the Budapest gambit with the move e5. This move opens up lines for the dark-squared bishop and queen and also attacks white's center. If white wants to fight for an opening advantage, white should accept the Budapest gambit with d takes e5. Accepting the gambit and attacking black's knight. Black now focuses on attacking the e5 pawn, starting with knight to g4. After bishop f4, knight c6, and knight f3, both sides have been developing pieces to fight for the e5 square. After bishop to b4 check, white can play knight to c3, letting black capture the knight and double white's pawns, or play knight b to d2. This is a solid move for white, but white must be on the alert for one deadly tactical trick that black will try. After queen to e7, black adds a third attacker to e5 and also lines up with white's king on the e-file. A simple way to play for white is to play e3, bishop e2, and castle kingside, returning black's gambit pawn on e5. Like most other gambit lines that black can play, white should have the better chances by developing sensibly and staying alert for tricks. But sometimes white plays a3, trying to unpin the knight on d2. Black now has the surprising knight g takes e5, completely ignoring white's threat. White will still be just fine after knight takes e5 and playing e3. But if white insists on capturing black's bishop with a takes b4, black can now win the game in one move. Can you see how? That's right, with the smothered mate, knight to d3 check. The pawn on e2 is pinned, and the king is smothered by its own pieces. You've now learned some typical gambit openings and ideas, so now it's your turn to test out your gambit knowledge.